Chapter 12 Realm of the Frost King. Grog and Crodis helped Tarion in her efforts to open the secret door, until it became obvious that it was impossible. This fact did nothing to discourage Tarion, who continued to bash, scratch, and pull at the unmoving slab of rock, until her fingers were bleeding. Grog, however, decided that his time would be far better spent helping Crodis to light a fire, which he did, and then was getting utterly and hopelessly drunk, which he also did. By the time night had fallen and the storm had dissipated, Tarion had given up on the door and now stood in front of it with her mace in her hand and vengeance in her eyes. Crodis was huddled close to the small fire, staring into the flame and looking grim. Grog was pacing back and forth in front of the mine's entrance, cursing the Ancient Ones and sucking the last few drops from the bottle of smolder whiskey. "I'm not a bad dwarf," he mumbled, pointing an accusatory finger at the few stars he could see through the breaking cloud. "That little Kavina said it. So why you gotta punish me so bad?" Receiving no answer from the gods, Grog raised the bottle to his lips, but found, to his dismay, that there was nothing left to swig. He hurled the empty bottle through the mouth of the mine. "Take that, you bastards!" he roared. Much to Grog's surprise, the gods answered. "Hey, what the fuck?" An angry voice growled from outside. Grog barely had the time or the sobriety to register that this may not have been a god, before a dozen heavily armed dwarves and Kavina stepped close enough to the mine's entrance for him to see their shapes in the flickering firelight. "Shit! Tarion, look!" Grog reached for the swords on his belt, then remembered he'd taken his belt off and left it by the fire because it was uncomfortable. He staggered toward it. "Stay where you are," a swarthy voice yelled from the darkness. "Unless you want an arrow through the throat." Grog froze. He definitely did not want that. His throat was already on fire from drinking more than half a bottle of straight whiskey. Adding an arrow to the mix really would have been just a bit too much. Crodis had at least managed to grab hold of one of his hatchets, but he too had frozen at the sound of the gruff threat. He remained in a half-crouch by the fire, his orange eyes peering out of the mine. Tarion, somewhat predictably, had not frozen. In fact, the threatening voice had ironically been the one thing that had roused her from her silent vigil. She was now marching towards the front of the mine, with her mace clasped in her hand. "That's far enough, sister," came the voice from the darkness, and despite his extreme state of inebriation, Grog recognized the twang of a northern accent. The spark of hope that this realization kindled in him was fanned into a blaze of relief as the dwarves and Kavina stepped further within the reaches of the fire's light. These were not undead monsters or skeleton-faced cave-dwellers. These were regular dwarves, pointing a whole bunch of regular arrows right at Grog and his companions. "I said that's far enough!" the lead dwarf shouted at Tarion. He was wearing a leather eye patch over his left eye, but at this range, Grog didn't think it would matter. The dwarf drew his bowstring back a little tauter. Tarion slowed but didn't stop. Her wrist moved in little circles, keeping the head of her fearsome mace moving a rhythmic ellipse close to the stone floor. "You've got 5 seconds to lower your bows and tell me who you are before I kill you all," she said in a husky whisper. "Oh, we've got 5 seconds," the northern dwarf blurted incredulously. "Tarion, that's enough," Crodis roared, his deep voice reverberating off the walls of the mine. "I am Crodis Bittergrip, member of the King's Guard," he said to the eye patch. "That's Maugrog Ironheart, former general of High King Owen's armies. And this," Crodis scowled sideways at Tarion, "is Tarion Slate Chisel, a Kavina of war who needs to calm down." "Interesting names and titles," Eye Patch said, keeping his arrow aimed roughly at Tyrion's heart. And what exactly might three such esteemed people be doing skulking in an abandoned mine on a night like this? Look, pal, Grog said, raising what he hoped was a pacifying hand and staggering slightly to one side. It's a long and fascinating story, but I don't want to tell it with an arrow pointed in my face. Why don't you put those things down, and Tyrion will put her fucking thing down, and you can share whatever food you might have with us, and we'll all just sit by the fire and, work this out like civilized dwarfs. You're drunk, Eye Pitch observed. I am, my friend, Grog confirmed. And you're a northern dwarf, aren't you? A realm 13er, I can tell from your accent. You're not some bastard evil underground dwarf, right? Nah, Eye Pitch lowered his bow a little. And I'm thinking you're not either. But are you really Grog the Unkillable? And if so, what in the name of the Ancient Ones are you doing here? None of your fucking business! Tyrion snapped, still scanning the semicircle of dwarves like a falcon, deciding which rabbit to eat first. Oh, but it absolutely is my business, said Eye Pitch, stepping fully into the mine. The firelight glinted off a large ruby pinned against his mustard-coloured cape. His beard was as black as Grog's, but not nearly as bushy, and he had the same smudges of black war paint under his eyes that Major Hammerbuckle had worn. My name is Horlog Gravelbane. Most folks just call me Lug. I'm a loyal servant of King Thorgrim Frosthammer, and sworn to protect the 13th realm from all who may trespass within its borders. Put your mace away, Tyrion, Crodus said, making a show of dropping his own weapon. Haven't we had enough trouble with trolls and underground dwarves and frozen bloody ponds without fighting amongst ourselves? If they are who they say they are, Tyrion said, although Grog noticed that her mace now hung still by her side. How did they find us in this particular mine? There must be hundreds of them dug in these mountains. But only one with a fire blazing cheerily by its entrance, Lug said, pointing an arrow at the fire. Kinda stands out like dog's balls. We came to see whether there was some accursed dwarves here that needed killing. Not that they've been announcing themselves with fire the last few nights. I like this dwarf, Grog said, waggling a finger at Lug. He's a clever dwarf. I like his eye patch, and ooh! Grog tilted his head to the side. And he's got some gold earrings. I like his gold earrings. Lug grinned. I think we can put our weapons away, he said to his squad, and grab out some of that salted venison to share with our new friend, Grog the Unkillable. You've had trouble the last few nights? Tyrion asked, the edge of menace now absent from her voice. Lug nodded. We have, but not as bad as I hear it's been in all the other realms. It seems these underground bastards don't much care for our cold climate. Why don't we share our tales? He suggested. As though the words reminded him of the freezing darkness he'd just emerged from, Lug pulled his mustard cape tightly around his shoulders and walked towards the fire, extending his hands towards its warmth. It sounds like you have a good one to tell. What's that you were saying about trolls? They gathered around the fire and swapped stories. Lug seemed at ease, although Grog noticed that most of his squad kept their eyes on Tyrion and their hands close to their weapons. Lug explained that undead and evil dwarves had been spilling out of the old mines all along the eastern borders of Realm 13, and pillaging farms and small settlements. The large city of Wolfgard, in the northwest, however, had not been attacked. Grog enthusiastically told the first part of his tale, even acting out his heroic encounters with the undead dwarves in Longdale, with a variety of drunken embellishments. But by the time where he got to the part where he met Crodus and Tyrion, the warmth of the fire and the bellyful of whiskey and meat, got the better of him. He suggested that one of his companions take over while he rested his eyes for a moment. As he drifted off, Tyrion was insisting that Lug must know a way to breach the stone door through which Orphan had been dragged, and Lug was insisting that he didn't. When Grog woke the next morning, he was far too hungover to bother feeling surprised that he was lying on his back in some kind of cart or carriage. He didn't even have the will or inclination to care that the cart was clearly moving at speed over bumpy ground, or that the sky was already turning from pink to pale blue. All his throbbing brain could really manage was a feeble, "Oh, shit," and a distinctly pessimistic hope that he was not going to vomit. "Oh, good morning, fearless guide." Tyrion's voice came from close by. Grog risked a minuscule head movement, found that the contents of his stomach didn't try for an immediate escape, and turned his head a little more, looking for the source of Tyrion's sarcastic voice. She was sitting almost directly above him on a long, leather-covered seat. Crodis was beside her. The toes of their boots were digging into his side. Grog realized that he was lying on the footboard of some kind of wagon. "What?" Grog croaked, and took a moment to try and work some moisture into his sandy mouth. "What are we doing?" "We're going to Wolfguard," Tyrion said. "We'll be there in a few hours." Why? Grog reached out to grab a hold of the seat so he could pull himself up, but his hand accidentally landed on Tyrion's knee. He pulled it away like a dwarf who touched a hot kettle. Tyrion gave him a look that was filled with far more pity than he would have liked, then grabbed him by the hand and hauled him into a sitting position. Grog took a moment to concentrate on not vomiting, then raised his head and looked around. They were moving at speed across a landscape of wet grass, mud, and sludgy snowdrifts. There was another long leather seat in front of him, where 2 northern dwarves sat next to a Kavina, who was holding the reins of the wagon. At the other end of these were 6 enormous white and brown reindeer. 2 similar wagons were rumbling across the tundra behind them on a muddy track, carrying the rest of Lug's squad. It was a lot to take in. "Why are we going to Wolfguard?" Grog asked. "It's out of our way." "Walking through this muck in a straight line to Mount Valkeen would have taken, 24 hours? Tyrion asked. "Not to mention all our gear and rations are wet." "All the eggs were broken," Crodis added dolefully. "Or," Tyrion continued, "Log said he could get us to Wolfguard in 5 hours by cart. There we should be able to get properly cleaned up and resupplied in a couple of hours. We might even get someone to take a look at those ribs of yours." Grog was surprised that Tyrion had even given a thought to Grog's ribs. "Then we're back on a cart and reaching the base of Mount Valkeen in just another 3 hours or so." Grog had lost track of the math somewhere early in Tyrion's explanation, but it definitely sounded as though this was a quicker, and much more comfortable, option. "What about Orphan?" Grog asked. "Just no luck?" "He's gone," Tyrion said, looking straight ahead with her jaw as tense as a bear trap. "And no attacks? No evil bastard dwarves?" "None where we were," Crodis said. "We stayed in the mine until a few hours before dawn, and then we started out for Wolfguard." No further questions leapt to Grog's mind, so he just lay back down on the floor of the wagon and rested his head on the small bundle of canvas that someone had so thoughtfully placed there for him. "You don't want to sit up here, Grog?" Crodis asked. "The breeze is very invigorating." "No thanks, mate," Grog said, closing his eyes. "Just wake me when we get there." The view as one approaches the city of Wolfguard is famed as one of the most breathtaking in all of Dwarven civilization. The white turrets and bastions of the mighty northern citadel rise like the candles of gods directly from the granite cliffs on the eastern slope of Owen's Ridge. With the snow-capped peaks and the immense citadel as its backdrop, the city sprawls outward towards the encircling hills in a complex web of well-paved roads and houses, with sharply slanted roofs and constantly billowing chimneys. Grog missed seeing all of this. In fact, by the time Terrian and Crodus kicked him awake, the wagons had stopped at the bottom of the wide stone staircase, which led up to the citadel, and Lug was already making arrangements for a meeting with the realm's king. "Get up, you bloody drunk!" Terrian was hissing at him. "We're about to meet a king!" "Oh, Thorgrim." Grog sat up, wincing at the myriad aches and pains which racked his body. "I and him are old chums. I've been here 100 times, although not since... Oh, fuck." Grog put his head in his hands as a terrible realization struck him. "What?" Terrian asked. "Not since what?" "Not since his brother." Grog paused. He never quite knew the right word to use. "Disappeared." "You mean High King Owen?" Crodus asked, his voice a reverent baritone. Grog nodded. "You think King Frosthammer will be mad about Algon's Pass?" Terrian asked. "Mad you and your army couldn't fight back the fog and those who wrought it?" "I think..." Grog looked up at the towering citadel. "I think I'll just wait with the cart while you go and, get supplies and stuff." "You know that's not happening." Crodus reached out and surprised the snot out of Grog by laying a firm hand on his shoulder. "We all have things in our past that we prefer not to think about, Maugrog. Things we'd prefer that others didn't discuss or see." Grog looked at the amethyst gemstone pinned to Crodus's blue cape and imagined the ravaged skin beneath. "I haven't thanked you yet for saving my life yesterday, both of you." Crodus looked back and forth between Terrian and Grog. "Oh, come on. King Frosthammer will surely not think less of you for what happened at Algon's Pass." He gave Grog a couple reassuring slaps on the shoulder and climbed out of the wagon. "There's more to this, isn't there?" Terrian asked, scrutinizing Grog with narrowed, mismatched eyes. "If only you knew," Grog thought, as he looked from Terrian to the white towers of the citadel he knew he must enter. If only everyone knew.